Under apartheid, South Africa was ranked the world's most unequal country in terms of income gap between rich whites and poor blacks. In 1994, apartheid was finally abolished, ending the system of radical segregation. And Nobel Peace Laureate Nelson Mandela won the first multiracial elections in a landslide. As head of the African National Congress, or ANC, Mandela went from serving a life sentence for terrorism to the presidency of a nation reborn. Incredibly, after 3 decades of ANC rule, South Africa still ranks as the world's most unequal nation. Some describe South Africa as a sinking ship. I asked my guests what happened to the promise of the Rainbow Nation. We're back, and I want to talk a little bit about how we got here. I mentioned at the beginning that I think most people haven't thought too much about South Africa since 1994, when apartheid ended, and from what we could see from the outside, there was a lot of optimism and hope and promise. What happened from 1994 to now to get us to where we are?
Well, actually, I think that the issue of South Africa is much older than 1994. I think the issue of South Africa, and to give the viewers kind of a bit of perspective, you must remember that South Africa is a very vast country. It's very big. It is as big as Western Europe, almost the same size, right? So if you take away Spain, I think South Africa is the size of Western Europe. So what you have is an extremely big country with a lot of different people. We have 11 official languages. And in 1910, the British made South Africa one country. Before that, there were different countries in the size. It was more a region than it was a country. The British tried to rule it unsuccessfully. Then came the Afrikaners. Also, it didn't work. And then finally, the ANC, the current government, is trying to rule it as one nation, as one group, as one country. And they are maybe the most spectacularly of all unsuccessful as well. So that's maybe South Africa's first problem, trying to force people to be one nation in order for economic realities to work out in the favor of the rulers. The second thing is the constitution. So another thing that was very popular back in the 90s was this wonderful South African constitution. The liberal South African constitution granting individual rights to everyone, and if you're an individual and your rights are secured, everyone is going to be just happy and it's just going to be all too peachy. That actually denied the reality in South Africa that there are so many different groups with different interests and different beliefs, different worldviews, to a point where functioning under the same courts of law isn't even possible in South Africa. There's traditional law and there's Western law, and you would know all about that, right? And there's different ways of looking at crime, there's different ways of looking at justice, there's different ways of looking at politics. What happened is that in the beginning years, in the early 90s, all this optimism came from a situation where everyone thought this is just going to work out fine on this constitutional basis. And now the same constitution is still, the legal basis in South Africa, but the interpretation of the same letters changed. A collectivist approach, furthering the cause of the National Democratic Revolution, which is a strong socialist, communist agenda that the government is pushing. And also, Afrikaners, or whites in general in South Africa, is denied that same access to a collectivized kind of effort. That's a bit of a background, a bit of a more theoretical background, but just those two things, the size of South Africa and the constitution, which is just interpreted as a radical document nowadays.
That's helpful. What about the geopolitical situation? How has that affected South Africa?
Since we're going back in time a little bit, the ANC was a liberation struggle movement, and it has never really evolved to be a politically orientated model designed to manage a country. It has never taken its own transformation, what you keep talking about. It has never really moved into how do we maintain a country, how do we grow a country, how do we create jobs. They've maintained that we're still in this liberation struggle. With that mindset, the relationships that they formed back in the 70s and the 80s with the Soviet Union, with Cuba, with Gaddafi, the PLO, all these Palestinian terrorist groups, Iran after 1979, those relationships became how they were funded, where they could flee to, and they used those relationships as a basis for training, for educating themselves. At the same time, they were taking funding from Western liberals, which is the irony in all of this. But they then got into power and went, well, our friends are not Europe or America. It's really the Palestinians, it's Gaddafi, it's Khomeini, it's...
What about the end of apartheid was certainly in large part due to the pressure coming from sanctions from the US and allies, so they didn't credit any of that with helping bring down the fall of apartheid?
Well, yeah, so interestingly, you know, and the research that I've done and the people that I've spoken to, South Africa was quite well supported up until the end of the Cold War by Western nations, but very covertly, because South Africa was seen as the bulwark against communist liberation struggles in Namibia, in Mozambique, in Angola, and all these other places. And because of that, the US was, you know, very supportive of South Africa, even though there were sanctions. Once the Cold War fell, all of that support disappeared, and all that was left was sanctions. And
happened very suddenly.
Very quickly.
Put South Africa at that stage in quite a bad situation.
Yeah. What's happened is South Africa has maintained those relationships with what, you know, the US has kind of called the axis of evil over time, but it's adversaries on the international stage. And South Africa continues to maintain those relationships in spite of the fact that it doesn't benefit South Africa either financially, economically, politically. But there is... It suits their ideology and their narrative that we're the liberation struggle, we're fighting oppression everywhere in the world, we're fighting racism everywhere in the world.
Yeah, we see a lot of that self-interest. I mean, just now, the ANC, the current government is in big trouble financially. We cannot get a national budget to pass. So there's a lot of internal friction because something called the Government of National Unity formed because the ANC could not get enough votes to form an outright majority. So they needed parties, other parties, including the Democratic Alliance, which is a supposedly liberal party. They needed these parties to form a government, and they cannot agree on this stage about a budget. But now you also have the situation where they are increasing taxation. Recently, an ANC official remarked that we looked at options to cut spending, but we have seen that that's not possible.
I'd like to discuss a little bit now about what the future is for South Africa. Where do we go? And it's interesting because right now it's in the news, right? People in America are talking about it. One of the big things that happened is that President Trump issued an executive order actually offering refugee status to, you know, white farmers, others who are struggling in South Africa. Joost, what's your reaction to that? Is that a good solution?
Well, firstly, before I answer, I want to say we are thankful. We're very thankful for two reasons. First is the attention that President Trump focused on South Africa, specifically in regards to expropriation of property without compensation, which is an insane policy.
And Marco Rubio, who's also made a few comments about it, Secretary of State. Continue.
Absolutely, we're very thankful. Secondly, we're very thankful that he recognized us as a people, as a distinct people, Afrikaners as a people. So obviously that is in our favor. We have that notion. We are a people upon ourselves, and for that reason we are thankful. However, we don't want to be refugees. We don't want to be refugees in another land. We are very much connected to the soil, to Africa, to South Africa. Although we understand that there are some Afrikaners and other people who would like to take up the opportunity to move to the United States or other places. It's for us an individual solution. It's an economic and a safety solution. It's not a solution for a people. For a nation, so we would like to remain in South Africa, and if that is our choice, we need to make plans on how to do that sustainably. So our message to the president, which went quite wide, was thank you for the recognition. However, we can sum up our reply in 3 words: help us here. Rather help us here. Recognize us in terms of an area for Afrikaners. Help us reimagine South Africa. What about another South Africa? You know, the word New South Africa has been used up, but what about another South Africa? One where people can make their own choices collectively. To just change the current officials in government would not solve South Africa's problems. We have a dispensational problem paired with demographic realities. We need to reimagine South Africa as a region and give people the opportunity to form areas and to get recognized for that.
Well, Justine, so you are an expat, but
Yes.
obviously still passionately interested in what's happening in South Africa. So what do you see as a solution? What could the U.S. do, or perhaps expats like yourself?
Well, again, very thankful to President Trump for bringing this to the world stage, and thank you, Elon, for being as vocal about it for some time now. The issue that I have is I certainly would love every South African to do exactly what they want to do, which is either stay or go, but have the option to stay and stay with the support of the US. The one thing that I think Trump has done by his executive order is show the ANC, which is really the problem child in the government at the moment, that the biggest resource that South Africa has is its people. And the US is only too happy to take those people and those resources away. Where Joost lives, Oranje, we were just talking about it, it's in a desert. It's in this barren area that they've turned into a paradise. That is the resourcefulness of South African people. You can put them anywhere and they will create something. They'll create businesses, they'll create farms, they'll be productive, they'll educate themselves, they'll set up schools, universities. It's within that culture to do that. And the recognition of that, I think, is incredible because it shows the ANC, who has marginalized those very people, that actually other countries treasure that. They want that. They value it. So I think that that's been a very important message. I also think that, coming here is not a solution. I love America. I love the opportunities here, the people, but that's not anything like home. Home is where the heart is. South Africa has incredible people. It's an incredibly friendly place. The moment you land, you're smiling, you're talking to everyone. You've made best friends in the queue at the passport. We produce incredible athletes. We produce incredible businessmen. And that is something that I would hate to see lost. Once that culture shifts and leaves and gets transplanted in America, it's going to assimilate. It's going to become American. And that's what I would hate to see hollowed out.
So yes, how much will do you see in South Africa today between the different communities? You said there's a lot of different ones. How much will is there for this united project?
I think it's fading. I think it's fading in terms of kind of a one-size-fits-all solution. If people were to connect with one another, it should not be forced from a central government. It has done much more harm than good because now people cannot voluntarily associate where they want to and how they want to. They are forced into systems through BEE and the likes. They are forced to do certain things. And the quickest way to make someone hate something is to force it upon them. So the economic model, people hate this economic model because it's forced upon them. I think the interest in opportunities for people to make their own decisions, whether that be the Zulu people in the Zulu kingdom, the Xhosa people in the Eastern Cape, or the Afrikaner people, or the Anglo white South Africans, or whomever, the different peoples of South Africa are much more interested in managing their own affairs rather than a central government forcing it upon them. And from there, you can build relationships based on choice and based on economic trade and things like that. So I think the idea that a unified South Africa can be kept together by a constitution, which is so wonderful, is just fading.